My boyfriend wanted to sleep with other girls while being in the relationship, so he opened our relationship on the name of exploring. Now he wants to break up because I slept with two other people and he slept with only one and says I cheated. For almost 3 years, my boyfriend and I had been inseparable. We met during university, survived exams, deadlines, terrible student housing, and all the chaos that comes with figuring out adulthood for the first time. He was my first real relationship, my first love, and the only person I had ever slept with. Before me, though, he had a much more experienced past. He had dated casually, hooked up with different people, and generally explored his 20s in a way I never really had the chance to. Despite that difference, our relationship always felt solid. We talked constantly about our future together, about moving in permanently after graduation, getting stable careers, maybe even having kids one day once life stopped feeling so uncertain. But after university ended, things started changing faster than either of us expected. For the first time since we got together, we were living apart for an extended period of time. He landed a graduate job in another city almost immediately after finishing his degree, while I moved back into my family home and picked up shifts working in hospitality while trying to figure out my own next step. What used to be late-night study sessions together and spontaneous takeaways in our tiny flat turned into awkward phone calls squeezed between work schedules and exhausted texts at midnight. Weeks started passing without us seeing each other in person. At the same time, our relationship had already been under strain before the distance even happened. Final year stress had hit both of us hard. We were arguing more than we ever had before, usually over tiny things that didn't even matter. We both seemed permanently anxious and exhausted. The intimacy between us slowly disappeared too. We went from being affectionate and close all the time to barely touching each other at all. Our intimacy became rare, then almost non-existent for months. I struggled with it more than he did because my libido has always been much higher than his. I try not to pressure him, but internally it was difficult not to feel rejected or unattractive after a while. Eventually we sat down and had an honest conversation about everything. It was uncomfortable, but also strangely freeing. We admitted that the relationship had started to feel stale and routine, like we were stuck somewhere between being a couple and just being emotionally dependent roommates who loved each other. That was when he brought up the idea of opening the relationship while we were living apart. At first, I genuinely thought he was joking. But the more we talked, the more serious he became. He said maybe it would help take some pressure off us while we were long distance, especially since neither of us really knew how long it would take before we lived in the same city again. What shocked me most was how calm and open he seemed about it. He even admitted that the idea of me sleeping with someone else, or potentially us experimenting together one day, was something he found exciting rather than threatening. I know a lot of people would hear that and think our relationship was already doomed, but honestly, at the time it felt strangely validating. I had quietly carried this anxiety for a long time that I was somehow missing out on experiences everyone else seemed to have in their early 20s. I loved my boyfriend deeply and still genuinely believed he was the person I wanted to eventually settle down with, but a small part of me had always wondered what it would feel like to explore my sexuality outside of the one relationship I'd ever known. Because he was the one who suggested it, it almost felt safe to admit those feelings out loud for the first time. There wasn't jealousy or anger in the conversation. It was more like two people trying to figure out who they were becoming after university had ended and adulthood suddenly became real. Part of me felt excited by the idea of freedom and new experiences. Another part of me felt guilty for even thinking that way when I still loved him so much. I think that's what made the whole situation confusing. Nothing was actually broken between us. We still cared about each other deeply. We still talked about our future together constantly. But underneath all of that was this growing fear that we had become too comfortable, too young, too inexperienced, and that one day resentment or regret would creep in if we ignored those feelings instead of confronting them honestly. About a month after we agreed to open the relationship, I actually went through with it. I ended up sleeping with two different people, one girl and one guy, both of whom I met on dating apps. From the very beginning, I was completely honest with both of them that I had a boyfriend, and that this wasn't me looking for a new relationship. I explained that my boyfriend and I had opened things up because we were long distance temporarily, and because we both wanted the chance to explore a bit while we were still young. Neither of them had any issue with it at all. If anything, they appreciated the honesty. The girl and I ended up becoming surprisingly close quite quickly. What started as casual flirting turned into this weirdly comfortable friendship with benefits situation. We only actually slept together a couple of times, mostly after nights out drinking, but a lot of the time we just hung out together like normal friends. We'd sit in her apartment playing Minecraft for hours, go to the pub, order takeaway, complain about work, and generally just enjoy each other's company. Honestly, part of the reason I stayed over so often wasn't even about sleeping or being intimate. Living back at home after having years of independence at university was driving me insane. My parents still treated me like I was 16 years old instead of an adult woman who had already lived away from home. Being at her apartment gave me a sense of freedom and independence again that I'd really been missing. Throughout all of this, I genuinely thought I was doing everything right. I never hid the fact I had a boyfriend. I never lied about where I was staying. My boyfriend knew I was spending time with her and sleeping at her place sometimes, and because of the conversation we had about opening the relationship, I assumed he understood what that implied. I also assumed he was probably doing the same thing on his end. There were nights where he'd disappear for hours, stop replying in the evenings, or suddenly not want to call before bed like we usually did. One of my friends from university even sent me a screenshot of his dating profile a few weeks earlier, and I remember laughing about it because I genuinely thought that was the entire point of what we'd agreed to. Things only blew up because he's meant to visit me this weekend. Since he'd previously mentioned being interested in the idea of a threesome and specifically said the idea of watching me with someone else turned him on, I casually brought up the possibility to the girl I'd been seeing. She was completely open to it and thought it sounded fun. I honestly thought my boyfriend would be excited that I'd actually tried to arrange something based on what he himself had suggested. Instead, he completely lost it. The second he realized I had already slept with her before even mentioning the threesome idea, his entire attitude changed. He became furious almost instantly and started acting like I'd betrayed him. He said he felt cheated on because I hadn't explicitly sat him down and said, "By the way, I slept with this girl." He kept repeating that he thought I had only been hanging out with her as a friend, and that hearing I'd actually slept with her made him feel physically sick. I was honestly blindsided. To me, the entire point of opening the relationship was that we were both allowed to explore independently while we were apart. That was how I understood every conversation we'd had about it. We had literally talked about wanting experiences before settling down fully into adult life. He had specifically brought up opening things up first. He had talked about threesomes, about curiosity, about freedom, about us both getting a chance to explore safely while we were still young. At no point did I understand the agreement to mean, you can only sleep with people if I'm physically present. But according to him, that was exactly what he meant. He insisted the whole idea was only supposed to involve threesomes or shared experiences together, not me having separate experiences on my own. Hearing that completely threw me, because that was not how the conversation had sounded to me at all. It felt like we had somehow walked away from the same discussion with two entirely different understandings of what our boundaries were. What made it even more confusing was the dating app situation. When my friend sent me the screenshot of his profile, I genuinely wasn't upset because I thought we were both doing the same thing. But now he insists he only downloaded the app to look for a third for us, not to actually hook up with anyone himself. I honestly don't know whether I believe that or not. Part of me feels guilty because I can see that he's genuinely hurt, but another part of me feels frustrated because I genuinely thought I was following the agreement we had both made together. Now, everything feels messy and confusing. He says he feels betrayed. I feel like I'm being punished for taking seriously a conversation he started in the first place. And underneath all of it is this horrible feeling that maybe opening the relationship didn't expose cheating or dishonesty between us, but exposed the fact that we were never actually on the same page to begin with. I honestly feel like my whole world has been turned upside down over what was, in my mind, a massive misunderstanding. For almost 3 years, my boyfriend and I had been inseparable. He was my first relationship, my first real love, my first everything. We built our lives around each other during university. We survived deadlines, exams, awful student housing, and all the stress that comes with trying to figure out adulthood together. We used to talk constantly about our future. We had names picked out for our future kids. We joked about what kind of dog we'd own and what street we wanted to buy a house on someday. I genuinely believed I had already found the person I would spend the rest of my life with. But over the past year, things had started feeling different between us. We were both stressed out constantly with coursework and career pressure, and slowly the relationship started feeling more like routine than excitement. The biggest issue was intimacy. I felt unwanted sometimes. Even though he reassured me, he still loved me. We argued more than we ever had before, and for the first time since getting together, it felt like we were drifting instead of growing closer. Then, after he moved away for his graduate job and I stayed behind living with my parents while working hospitality shifts, the distance made everything feel even stranger. We went from seeing each other constantly to barely seeing each other at all. During one conversation about how disconnected we'd both been feeling, He brought up opening the relationship temporarily while we lived apart. He said maybe it would help take pressure off us and let us explore before settling down properly later in life. He even mentioned that the idea of a threesome or seeing me with another person turned him on. At first I was shocked, but then I actually got excited by the idea. I'd never had the chance to explore my sexuality because I'd gone straight from being an insecure teenager into a long-term relationship. Part of me worried I'd regret never experiencing anything else. So when we agreed to open things up, I genuinely believed we both understood what that meant. I downloaded dating apps. He knew I had them. One of my friends even later sent me screenshots of his own profile, and I thought nothing of it because I assumed we were both doing the same thing. Over the next month, I slept with 2 people, one guy and one girl. The girl and I actually became pretty friendly. Most of the time, we just hung out, played Minecraft, went to pubs, and escaped our boring routines. I stayed at her apartment a few times because being back home with my parents after years of independence was suffocating. I was completely honest with her that I had a boyfriend, and that this was just exploration, nothing emotional. The entire time, I thought my boyfriend understood exactly what was happening. I mentioned staying at her place. I talked openly about spending time with her. Because he never reacted negatively, I assumed everything was fine. I genuinely thought he was probably seeing people too. Looking back now, maybe I should have spelled everything out more explicitly, but at the time it honestly never crossed my mind that he believed open relationship only meant future threesomes together and not separate experiences. Everything exploded when I brought up the idea of the 3 of us meeting. I thought he'd be excited because it was literally something he had fantasized about before. Instead, he completely lost it. He accused me of cheating on him. He said he had no idea I'd actually slept with this girl and that finding out changed the way he saw me entirely. I was blindsided. I kept trying to explain that I thought we were on the same page the whole time. Since then, he's barely spoken to me. He says he doesn't know if he can get past this, and that he needs time to think about whether he even wants to continue the relationship. I've deleted the apps, blocked the people I slept with, and apologized over and over because the last thing I ever wanted was to hurt him. I never went looking for another relationship or another emotional connection. I still love him completely. In my mind, all of this happened within the boundaries we had agreed on. But now I feel like I accidentally destroyed the future we spent years building together because we failed to communicate clearly enough about what open actually meant. I genuinely don't know what to do anymore, and I feel completely lost. From my perspective, my boyfriend and I mutually agreed to open our relationship while we were long distance, and I honestly believed we both understood that meant we could explore separately. I never hid the fact that I was seeing people, and I assumed he was too since he was also on dating apps. Now he says I cheated on him and that this has changed the way he sees me forever. I love him deeply and still see him as the person I want to marry someday, which is why this hurts so much. I've already deleted the apps, blocked the people I was seeing, and apologized repeatedly, but he's become distant and cold. Was this genuinely cheating if we had agreed to open a relationship, or was it just terrible communication on both sides? Is there any way to rebuild trust after something like this? Or is the relationship already over even if neither of us intended to hurt the other?